How's it going today? So first, today I'm going to give you a couple of tips on what you can do to narrow down your problem if you have a car that needs to crank a couple of times before it starts, or it simply cranks forever before it actually starts and gets going. Alright, so the first thing I recommend you do is to, next time you get in your car and try to start the engine, to put in the key in the ignition and then just cycle it on and off a couple of times before actually you crank your engine. And here's what I mean by cycling your key on and off a couple times. Basically, as you can see on here, we have lock, accessories, on, and then start. So you put in your key and turn it to the on position, which should be the second click. Then you wait about 10 seconds, and then you turn your key to the left and take it out. Wait another 10 seconds, and then you just simply repeat this step 2 or 3 more times. And then after the third time you cycle your key or crank the engine, and if your engine starts right up, then that indicates you have a potential problem with your fuel pressure. And that's because when we were cycling our key on and off, we were basically priming our fuel pump, making sure there's adequate pressure from our fuel pump all the way to our engine. Now if everything is working properly, you shouldn't have to do this, because in your fuel pump you usually have a check valve that whenever you turn off your car, make sure the pressure that's inside your fuel line doesn't drop below a certain point. Now before you go and change your fuel pump, there's something else that could cause the same issue, and that's your fuel filter. See, the fuel from your fuel pump travels through fuel line, goes through your fuel filter, then from there to your intake manifold, and then to your injectors and your engine. Now if you have a clogged or partially clogged fuel filter, that's going to keep away the necessary PSI of pressure you need in your fuel line to your injectors that would need to get your engine going. Now if you really want to narrow down your problem between the fuel filter and the fuel pump, I would recommend use one of these. And this is a fuel pressure gauge that's going to tell you exactly how many PSI of pressure you have in your fuel line. What you'll need to do is to insert your pressure gauge before and after your fuel filter, and then compare the readings, and if the reading after the fuel filter is a lot lower, that could potentially indicate a clogged or partially clogged fuel filter. Now if you find that cycling the key on and off a couple times before you try to start your car makes no difference, and the car still is cranking a bunch of times before it actually starts, well in that case the most likely culprit is going to be your ignition system. So basically you could have old or fouled up spark plugs which are not producing a strong enough spark for your engine to start, or you might have old or worn out spark plug wires that are not allowing enough voltage to reach your spark plugs, producing a strong enough spark. Also, if you have a distributor ignition system, there's a chance that your distributor and cap and rotor are worn out, and therefore again affecting the strength of the spark that comes out of your spark plugs. So the next step would be to remove your spark plugs and take a close look at them and see whether they're worn out or not. And if you're unsure how to do that, I'll put a link to a video I made recently on how you can exactly do that on this side of the screen. Also put a link to another video down here on how you can go about testing your spark plug wires as well. But it's a good idea, if there's any indication that your spark plugs are worn, to replace both your spark plugs and your spark plug wires at the same time. Now besides problems with your ignition and fuel system, here are some other things that could cause a hard starting condition. A dirty or clogged air filter is definitely going to keep enough air from entering your engine, therefore causing you to have trouble when starting your car. So you should go ahead and remove your air filter and then inspect it, and if it's too dirty, then you should definitely go ahead and replace it. Now besides a dirty air filter, a dirty throttle body or idle air control valve could also cause you to have a hard time starting your car. And if you feel like that could be your problem, then fear none. You can check out this video. I put a link to it right here. In that video I go over how you can exactly clean a throttle body and idle air control valve. Now besides your throttle body being dirty, a bad throttle position sensor could also cause you to have a hard time starting your car. Also, another sensor that could cause the same problem is a MAF sensor, which if your car is equipped with, either goes right on your air filter box or on this air tube that goes from your air filter box to your intake manifold. Now a quick tip I can give you is to, before you start your car, if you're having a hard time starting your car, to go ahead and disconnect the connector that goes to either your MAF sensor or your throttle position sensor if you suspect a problem with either of them. And then if your car starts right up, then you more than likely have a problem with that sensor. See, both your throttle position sensor and your MAF sensor are responsible for telling your computer how much air is entering your engine, therefore letting it calculate the air-fuel mixture properly. And then what happens when you remove the connector from these sensors is that your computer goes to some preset parameters regarding the signal that it's supposed to receive from these sensors, and then if your car starts easier, then that's going to indicate a problem with one of these sensors. Now obviously removing the connector from these sensors is not a bulletproof testing procedure for these sensors, but there is a way that you can, just by using a simple multimeter that you can buy for a few bucks at your local auto parts store, test these sensors And yep, you guessed right, I have a video on how you can do that. I'll put a link to them on this side of the screen again for you to check out as well. There'll also be links in the description box down below. Alright, so I know that was a bunch of sensors and different components that could affect the heart starting condition, but if I had to go from the most likely culprit to the least likely, I would say start off with your spark plug wires, distributor cap and rotor, and from there dirty air filter to a dirty throttle body or an idle air control valve. Alright, so that should cover it for this video. Hope you liked the video. If you did, please give it a thumbs up, subscribe if you want to see more like it, and I'll see you next time. Thanks for watching.